Hello friends, welcome to Unacademy. Let's crack NEET PG. In this video, I will be discussing the AIMS June 2020 OBG recall questions. I am Dr. Shonali Chandra, MS Obs Gynae from Maulana Azad Medical College, New Delhi. So the Unacademy platform is India's largest learning platform, which can help you crack NEET PG. If you take the Plus subscription, you get access to unlimited live and recorded courses from India's best educators. You will get daily live classes, structured courses, live tests and quizzes, and unlimited access. We have top educators with us like Dr. Nikita Nanwani, Dr. Preeti Sharma, even Dr. Devesh Mishra as well, who take lectures on the Unacademy subscription platform. There are various courses offered in the 19 subjects that are there to choose. You can choose from the various subject-wise courses or batch courses as well. There are various ongoing courses in our platform which you can have a look at. And the subscription comes for various months. We have 3 months, 6 month, 12-month subscription. So the 12-month subscription gives you more time to do the lectures and also gives you time in the end to revise. So if you see that the subscription, the 12-month subscription also turns out to be more economical in the long term. And for those of you who are still in their MBBS third year and final year, who are juggling duties and hospital schedules and classes and want a slower pace of preparation, they can easily go for the 24-month subscription, and that also turns out to be more economical eventually. So now let us talk about the questions that came in this AIMS June 2020, and I will be discussing these questions here with you. So there's a hypertensive pregnant woman who presented with abdominal pain, vaginal bleeding, and loss of fetal movements. What is the most likely diagnosis? Now, preterm labor. She could be in preterm labor because she has abdominal pain. But unless and until the labor is complicated, why would there be vaginal bleeding or loss of fetal movement? So that is not the answer here, right? Placenta previa bleeding is painless and causeless, and usually the fetus is not affected, right? So placenta previa is also not the answer here. Hydroamnios or excessive liquor like polyhydroamnios, it can cause this abdominal discomfort and maybe some amount of pain also because of over distension of the uterus, but there will be no vaginal bleeding or loss of fetal movements unless and until it is complicated by some other problem. But you look here, abruption, history of hypertension, abdominal pain. In abruption, the placenta separates prematurely, leads to collection of blood behind the placenta, leads to initiation of uterine contraction. So the uterine tone is increased. There is a tense and tender uterus, and that is why the woman is complaining of abdominal pain. Loss of fetal movements because of the separation of placenta. The fetus is also compromised. So fetal distress of any kind goes more in favor of the diagnosis of placental abruption. Here they have given this statement, loss of fetal movements. So that is why, looking in totality at the clinical profile, the diagnosis here is placental abruption. Now let's talk about the next question. All are mechanisms of oral contraceptive pills except. Now the oral contraceptive pills contain estrogen and progesterone, and both of these, when they are present in the oral contraceptive pills, they are present in a fixed amount. The tablet is supposed to be taken daily. So when you take these pills and the pills contain estrogen, progesterone in a fixed amount, they lead to feedback inhibition of the pituitary, and that leads to decrease in FSH and LH levels. So this decrease in FSH levels leads to decreased follicular growth. Decrease in LH levels leads to inhibition of ovulation. So inhibition of ovulation, my friends, is the most important or the main mechanism of action of oral contraceptive pills. So yes, they prevent ovulation, and they do so by decreasing the gonadotropins, not by increasing the gonadotropins. So that is your answer here, right? So increase in gonadotropins does not happen, right? Decrease in gonadotropin happens. The progesterone component also thickens the cervical mucus. That is also true. And the progesterone makes the endometrium thin and unresponsive to implantation. So that is also true. So remember that the main mechanism of action is prevention of ovulation, and thickening of cervical mucus and prevention of implantation are also contributory as the mechanism of action. Now let's talk about the third question. Criteria used for the diagnosis of abdominal pregnancy is, this is a repeat question. This is a very direct question. It is the Studiford criteria. The Spiegelberg criteria is used for the diagnosis of ovarian pregnancy. The Rubens criteria is used for the diagnosis of cervical pregnancy. Nowadays, we use the Palman's criteria for the diagnosis of cervical pregnancy. The ring of fire sign is seen around any mass or cyst which has a lot of vascularity around it. So it is seen in tubal pregnancy. It is also seen in a corpus luteal cyst, right? So these are simple pointers here to help you remember that Spiegelberg criteria is for ovarian pregnancy, Rubens is for cervical pregnancy, and where is the ring of fire sign seen? Tubal pregnancy and corpus luteal cyst. And Studiford criteria is for abdominal pregnancy. Now next question. There's a 50-year-old multiparous woman who came to the gynae OPD with abnormal uterine bleeding for 2 months. What is the next line of management? They have asked this question 3 times alone in the last 5 years. They're very fond of asking abnormal uterine bleeding, and the concern here is that the woman is more than 45 years old. So before doing any treatment, hormonal, surgery, any treatment, the most important aspect in this woman is to rule out malignancy or endometrial hyperplasia. That is the most important requirement to do, right? And that is why you have to go for an endometrial biopsy and endocervical curettage. That is why that is the requirement to be done. That is the most important, or the next line of management is an endometrial biopsy and endocervical curettage to rule out any malignancy or endometrial hyperplasia. Once the malignancy or endometrial hyperplasia is ruled out, then we can think of treatment options, right? So progesterone treatment, or treatment with Mirena, LNG-IUS Mirena, or treatment with hysterectomy, whatever be the modality of treatment, will depend on whether the woman has malignancy, whether the woman has hyperplasia or not, right? So to find out that, first we have to go for endometrial biopsy and endocervical curettage. Now the next question. A woman came with 10-week amenorrhea with severe nausea, vomiting. Size of the uterus is 12 to 14 weeks. Size of the uterus more than the period of gestation. Severe nausea, vomiting. USG shows no storm appearance. Your diagnosis is a complete molar pregnancy. This complete molar pregnancy is not normal, it is abnormal. Grape-like vesicles are filled inside the uterine cavity, giving this no storm appearance. There is no fetus. So obviously you don't want to continue this pregnancy. No, you don't want to continue this pregnancy. You have to evacuate the uterus of its contents, and suction and evacuation is the treatment of choice. All right, diagnostic laparoscopy offers no advantage, right? It has absolutely no role here. And follow-up will come after suction and evacuation. After we have done suction and evacuation, then we go for follow-up with beta HCG. But the prime management is, of course, suction and evacuation. Moving on to the next question. Which among the following is not a part of PCOS treatment? So for polycystic ovarian syndrome, what is not a part of the treatment? The main problem with this polycystic ovarian syndrome is basically of anovulation, right? That is the main problem, right? So when a woman is trying to conceive and she has polycystic ovarian syndrome, she needs help and assistance with ovulation induction drugs. Now both these letrozole and clomiphene citrate, they are ovulation drugs. They are ovulation induction drugs, and both of them are used. That is fine. What about laparoscopic ovarian drilling? Yes, it was also done in the past, because in polycystic ovarian syndrome, you see that the ovaries are enlarged with multiple follicles, right? There are enlarged ovaries with multiple follicles. and these follicles are not developing properly, and this ovarian stroma is abundant and thick. It is this ovarian stroma that is contributing to the increased amount of androgens, right? So what we would do with laparoscopic ovarian drilling was that we would drill holes in the stroma. We would burn the stroma actually, right? So if we would burn the stroma, destroy the stroma, we would decrease the androgens, and that would help in ovulation, right? So laparoscopic ovarian drilling also has a role. All right. But ulipristal acetate is not a part of treatment for PCOS. Ulipristal is a new drug which is a selective progesterone receptor modulator. It is selective progesterone receptor modulator. So again, like selective estrogen receptor modulators, this ulipristal acetate is a selective progesterone receptor modulator having anti-progestogen activity in some tissues and progestational activities in other tissues, right? So ulipristal acetate is used, the uses for ulipristal acetate are very varied. It is used to deal with fibroids. It can shrink the size of the fibroid. That is where it is used. It is used in emergency contraception also, all right? So these are the uses, two important uses of SPRM ulipristal acetate, okay? Now, moving on to the next question. Not included in biophysical profile. Simple question. And repeat question again. Maybe you got confused between NST or CST. NST is the non-stress test, and non-stress test is a component of biophysical profile. Biophysical profile is also called as the Manning score, right? So NST is a component. CST stands for contraction stress test, and contraction stress test is not a component, right? So NST, fetal breathing, fetal movements, fetal tone, and amniotic fluid volume. These are the five components of biophysical profile, right? So NST is done on the CTG machine, and breathing movement of the fetus, movements, body movements, fetal tone, and amniotic fluid volume, these are seen on ultrasound for 30 minutes, right? Contraction stress test is not a part of biophysical profile or Manning score. Next question. A woman came with mild abdominal pain and history of spotting. Spotting means only mild bleeding. Ultrasound shows no fluid in the pouch of Douglas. That means there is no bleeding inside the peritoneal cavity. There is no gestational sac seen in the uterus. No gestational sac in the uterus. Ovaries are normal. Urine pregnancy is positive. So she is definitely pregnant with some mild symptoms of a pain and just a here and that bit of spotting. But this location of pregnancy is not known. So this is location of pregnancy is unknown. So it is pregnancy of unknown location. Now, this unknown location, she could be an ectopic, I don't know right now. She could be a very early intrauterine pregnancy, I don't know right now. Or she could be a failing intrauterine pregnancy, I don't know right now. Okay, so right now what I know is that she is pregnant with some mild symptoms and the location of pregnancy is unknown. But the concern is that it could be an ectopic pregnancy. So the best way to manage is follow up with beta HCG, because if the beta HCG is going to plateau, then I can say it is ectopic pregnancy. And if the beta HCG doubles every 48 hours, I can say that it is an intrauterine pregnancy and healthy intrauterine pregnancy. So following up with beta HCG is important here. You can't consider it complete abortion and call after 15 days, because complete abortion will present with a different history. She will present with more bleeding, more abdominal pain. She could give history of passage of fleshy mass, fleshy products per vaginum, and this bleeding would last for a couple of hours, pain would last for a couple of hours, and then the bleeding has subsided, right? So then I would consider it maybe a complete abortion, right? But that kind of history is not given in this question. Hospitalized for observation, right now it is too early, right? And she is in very early stage of a pregnancy where we are not seeing the pregnancy anywhere. So I will follow up with beta HCG and then see how it behaves. Is it likely ectopic or early intrauterine pregnancy? If my doubt is towards ectopic, then as second step I would like to hospitalize for observation, otherwise not right now. Diagnostic laparoscopy is not an option because see, you've done the scan, the ultrasound shows nothing, right? So what additionally you will be able to look for see on a diagnostic laparoscopy. On the laparoscopy you can see the outside of the uterus, the outside of the tube also, right? So it's very difficult to see a very small pregnancy from the outside over the tube. So if these are the tubes and this is the very small pregnancy, you will not be you will not be able to see anything on laparoscopy, right? So laparoscopy is also not considered here good. So what you have to do is you have to follow up with beta HCG and you have to keep repeating beta HCG every 48 hours. If the beta HCG is doubling every 48 hours, that means it is likely a healthy intrauterine pregnancy. If the beta HCG is plateauing every 48 hours, then the diagnosis is likely an ectopic. And if the beta HCG falls by about 50%, then it is likely an abortion or a failing intrauterine pregnancy. All right. So this is how the beta HCG follow-up helps in this circumstance. Now let's talk about the next question here. Which muscle is not cut during mediolateral episiotomy? So if this is the vagina here and this is the anus here, right? The mediolateral episiotomy is given like this. All right. And this area is the area of the perineum. So it is the perineum that we are cutting, right? And the muscles that make up the perineum are bulbospongiosus, superficial and deep transverse perineum. Obturator muscle is not here in the perineum at all. Obturator muscle is in the lateral pelvic wall, right? It is in the lateral pelvic wall. So obviously the answer can be, the question can be answered with simple anatomical knowledge, right? So obturator muscle is not there at all. It is there in the pelvic side wall. So that is the muscle that is not cut during mediolateral episiotomy. Moving on to the next question. Increase in ESR in pregnancy is due to increase in which components in the blood? So we know that there is increase in ESR pregnancy. ESR is erythrocyte sedimentation rate. Erythrocyte sedimentation rate, right? And ESR increases because of increase in fibrinogen. Fibrinogen increases in pregnancy by about 50%. Platelets actually decrease in pregnancy. Albumin, albumin concentration actually decreases in pregnancy. And antithrombin levels, they don't affect the erythrocyte sedimentation rate. And in fact, antithrombin levels, they remain the same in pregnancy, right? So it is the fibrinogen levels which increase and cause an increase in ESR in pregnancy. Now, the next question. There is a 45-year-old woman who is diagnosed with a single fibroid, right? The uterus is 14 weeks in size, but the woman is asymptomatic. What is the management? Straightforward question. Doesn't matter if the woman is 45 years of age, doesn't matter what the size of the uterus is, as long as she is asymptomatic, no treatment is required, right? And if you think that she's 45 years of age, she's an advanced stage, so let's do a hysterectomy. No, right? Anyways, fibroids are going to shrink after menopause. Anyways, fibroids shrink after menopause, right? So fibroids are estrogen dependent smooth muscle tumors of the uterine muscle, and they respond to estrogen and progesterone, and they grow under hormone influence. And after menopause, fibroids generally shrink. Now this woman is already 45 years of age. She is asymptomatic. Likely course of events in her life would be that she would go into menopause, the fibroids will shrink and she will be fine. If after menopause her fibroids don't shrink, they persist, or any time that she becomes symptomatic or her fibroids start increasing in size, then we will start to treat her, then we will do some surgery, but not right now, right? So right now there is no role for hysterectomy or myomectomy. What medical management do you want to give? For what complaint? For what medical complaint? She is asymptomatic. So no treatment as the woman is asymptomatic is the answer of choice here in this question. Now the next question, again a simple straightforward question. The Bishop score include all except. Now Bishop score is a score which is used to assess the favorability of induction of labor. So before we are wanting to induce labor on the woman, we need to find out the cervical findings which help us determine whether the woman is favorable for induction or not, what are the chances of success of induction. So that is what we want to assess, and we use the Bishop score for that purpose. The Bishop score has components of dilatation, yes, length of the cervix, yes. So this is the cervical dilatation, that the cervix is dilating, right? And the effacement, the length of the cervix. So if this is the length of the cervix right now in the vagina, as the effacement will progress, what will happen? The length of the cervix will shorten, right? So the length of the cervix is another word, effacement, right? So we can measure the effacement as percentage also, and we can also measure the length of the cervix in the vagina. So yes, length of the cervix or effacement is a component of Bishop score. The position of cervix is also a component, right? The type of maternal pelvis is not a component of Bishop score. The most important component of Bishop score is the dilatation, right? And we had other component. The other component is the station of the fetal head. Okay, the station of the fetal head or presenting part, and the other component is the consistency of the cervix. Is the cervix soft or is the cervix firm, right? So consistency of cervix is also a component. So we use this Bishop in score, we use these parameters to make a score. The maximum score that can be there is 13, right? If the score is less than 4, that means it is very poor. It is very poor score. The induction has chances to fail. Induction of labor has chances to fail. So very poor, unfavorable score, right? And if the score is more than 9, then the chances of success of induction are very, very good, right? So that is how we use this score to assess the favorability, right? So if the score is poor, like less than 4, then we can give cervical ripening agents before using drugs that will go that can increase uterine contraction. So the goal of this score is to figure out whether the cervix is ripe or not, it is favorable for induction or not. So if we get a poor score, then we have to go for cervical ripening agents. Cervical ripening agents are used first, and once the cervix is ripe, then we can give the uterotonics like oxytocin to increase contraction. This is about induction of labor, and the induction of labor begins with assessing the favorability of induction of labor by using the Bishop score. The parameters are dilatation, effacement, that is length of cervix, position of cervix, station of head, and consistency of cervix. Type of maternal pelvis has got nothing to do with it. Okay. Now the next question, which is not found in fetal affection with Rh incompatibility? Now whenever the fetus is affected with Rh incompatibility, the problem here is that the antibodies from the maternal plasma, they move into the anti-D antibodies, from the mother, they move to the fetus. And if the fetus is Rh positive, then these anti-D antibodies can attack the fetal RBCs. They can attack the fetal RBCs and they will cause hemolysis of these fetal RBCs. So the kind of jaundice that is seen in newborns with Rh incompatibility is the hemolytic type of jaundice, right? This is hemolytic type of jaundice. So this newborn will have hemolytic jaundice, right? And he will have what we call as features of, so he will have features that of hemolytic jaundice, right? So in hemolytic jaundice, you know that it is not the conjugated bilirubin. No, it is the unconjugated bilirubin that is raised. It is the unconjugated bilirubin that is raised, right? Urine will have urobilinogen. Yes, fecal urobilinogen will also be present, right? But urine bilirubin will not be seen. Urine bilirubin comes because of conjugated. It is the conjugated bilirubin which comes in urine. And the fetuses and newborns liver has a neonate's liver has limited capacity for conjugation, right? So limited capacity of conjugation is there. Therefore, there is increase in unconjugated bilirubin because the fetuses and the newborn's liver cannot conjugate that excess unconjugated bilirubin which rises because of hemolysis, right? So when conjugated bilirubin is not raised, the urine the bilirubin does not come out into the urine, right? So urine bilirubin is not raised in fetal affection with Rh incompatibility. All right. So that is the answer here. Now the next question. This cancer cervix screening is done in which age group of women? Straight away, direct question, 21 to 65 years. That is when the cancer cervix screening is done. The screening begins at the age of 21 years, irrespective. Begins at the age of 21 years, irrespective of the age of onset of sexual intercourse, okay? Irrespective of the age of onset of sexual intercourse. So she might have started being sexually active at the age of 16, 17, 18. It doesn't matter. The screening starts from age 21 and it stops at the age of 65 if a woman has undergone regular screening throughout her reproductive lifespan, especially in the past 10 years. So after 65 years of age, screening is not recommended because the chances of cervical cancer drop there. But again, you have to keep in mind that we will stop at the age of 65 years if she has been regularly screened, if she has been screened in the past 10 years regularly, okay? Only then will we stop screening at 65. Otherwise, we will want to screen at 65 also, right? So that is again important point to note here. And all adolescents less than 21 years, no, screening is not done before the age of 21 years at all, right? And another very important aspect I want you to remember about cervical cancer screening is that when we use begin at the age of 21 years, we will use pap smear. We will use pap smear. We can use HPV DNA testing, or we can do co-testing. Co-testing is HPV plus pap smear, okay? HPV testing plus pap smear is called as co-testing. This is begun after 30 years of age. So if you have to screen a young girl between 21 to 30 years of age, we will use only PAPs, not HPV. Okay, HPV DNA testing or co-testing is begun after 30 years of age. So you will not do HPV DNA testing in a woman who is younger than 30 years of age. This is also important to remember in the screening protocol here. Now the next question. There's a 32-year-old lady who goes to the infertility clinic. She has regular cycles of 28 days. Okay, what should be evaluated? So which hormone should be evaluated? We have only two choices. Should we measure the LH level? Should we measure the progesterone level? What we want to find out is she ovulating or not? We want to find out whether she is ovulating or not, and the simplest way to test is to check for the serum progesterone level. Now the serum progesterone level peaks on the day 21 of the cycle, that is about 7 days, 7 to 8 days prior to the onset of menses, right? So that is when the progesterone levels peak, and progesterone come when there is a corpus luteum, and corpus luteum comes when there is ovulation happening. So simple way is to test for serum progesterone level on day 21 of the cycle. All right, and if progesterone levels are elevated, that means the woman has ovulated. So we can test for serum progesterone level on day 21 of the cycle, and if they are raised, that will confirm ovulation. If they are low, we will know that she is not ovulating. We don't test for serum LH levels for checking the ovulation. What we check is LH surge. What we check is LH surge in urine, right? So that is why testing for LH in serum is not an option at all. We check for LH surge in urine, and that too we check between day 12, 13, 14, 15, because that is the time in the middle of the cycle where ovulation is going to occur, right? So we check for surge in urine, and it is expected that after once the surge is detected in urine, ovulation is going to happen. So with checking the LH surge in urine is going to show us, it is going to give us an indirect evidence that ovulation is going to occur. All right. So but if we want to find out in a woman whether she has ovulated in the past cycle or not, the simplest way is to check for the serum progesterone level on day 21 of the cycle. Okay. Now for the next question here. There's a 38-year-old woman who visits the gynae OPD with pap smear report showing CIS. CIS is carcinoma in situ, right? What is the next step? The next step is to look at the cervix first. Carcinoma in situ is high-grade report. Possibly there could be high-grade cervical intraepithelial neoplasia, or there could be frank cancer also. So first step is to look at the cervix and go for a colposcopic biopsy. If we find a lesion, fine. Okay, if we find a growth, fine. If we don't, the next step is to go for a colposcopic biopsy, because now we will be able to look with magnification. Colposcopy offers magnification, and we can look at the cervix with magnification and see the abnormal areas to biopsy from. Hysterectomy is an extreme invasive surgery which will be done based upon the diagnosis that we make after doing a biopsy. Repeat cytology, no, this is bad cytology in itself. It has to be evaluated further. Cryotherapy is a modality for treatment of mild CIN, that is CIN1. Okay, so first the CIN has to be confirmed, and then we go for the diagnosis, then we go for the therapeutic treatment modality, right? So right now she has just a pap smear report which is abnormal, so we will first have to biopsy, preferably colposcopic biopsy under magnification, under vision. All right. Once the biopsy report comes, then based on the biopsy report, if it is CIN1, we can go for cryotherapy. But if the biopsy shows CIN2 or CIN3, this is high grade CIN, right? Then we will have to go for LEAP as the treatment of choice, right? So the treatment will depend upon the histopathology report, the biopsy report. Right now we have a pap smear report which is abnormal, so we have to histopathologically prove it. For that we have to go for colposcopic examination of the cervix. Okay. So this is about the discussion, my friends, and I hope I have covered all the questions. If you feel that some of the options are wrong or some of the options are missing, or any question that you feel has been missing, then please feel free to inform me, to go on the comment section and give your ideas there, because these are recall questions. So yes, there might be some mistakes. please feel free to correct them. So friends, you can hit the bell icon for future notifications. Let's Crack NEET PG. You can subscribe to Unacademy platform to download from the various subscription modules available, and you can use my code SHONALI Shonali and get a 10% discount on all your subscriptions. Thank you.